I am Jesse. My pronouns are masculine. You are very welcome here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto. We gather our different paths entwined to deepen our spiritual lives, nourishing connection, learning from each other, caring for each other, tending to our world. If we get crowded, please be aware that it's getting crowded in here and scooch over to make room for people and encourage them to find a seat in an expeditious way. We gather on unceded, stolen land of the Tamien and Ramaitush people. We acknowledge these communities in the interests of truth and justice, awareness and gratitude, in order to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. We pledge to join the Tamien and Ramaitush people whenever they ask us for solidarity. Masks are not required, but are strongly encouraged. We express our mutual respect by supporting each other's decisions about masking, distancing, and other health measures. If you are here in person and you have questions about Unitarian Universalism or about this congregation, stop by the welcome table with the blue tablecloth, which is out front by the big main doors, to chat with Elza or Kathy. They can also be found at this patio area here if they're not at the blue table there. You can leave contact information with them if you want to receive notifications of upcoming church events. And if this is the week you want to join the congregation, you can do that there at the blue table today. Now I have an announcement from Edie.
Good morning. We have an opportunity coming up this Saturday, and it's your choice to participate or not. From time to time, as a congregation, we look for opportunities to volunteer in the community. And we will be volunteering this coming Saturday at Family Giving Tree. And no, it's not Christmas time yet. It's not packaging or sorting gifts, but it's getting back to school backpacks put together for lower income families. And so you'll need to sign up for that to, reserve a spot and to get more information, like where do you go? It's in somewhere just a little bit south of here. I forget if it's Sunnyvale or Santa Clara. And so just consider it, and it'll be a fun event. We're confident because we've done it in prior times. And if you want to sign up today or get more information today, this poster will be over on the bulletin board for the CYRE programs. So just go use your QR code skills and find out more. Or I'll be around on the patio after service. Thank you. This coming Saturday, either morning or afternoon. Thank you.
Our speaker this morning is Dr. Chris Schriner, Minister Emeritus of Mission Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Fremont. Chris earned a BA from the University of Redlands and a doctorate in religion from Claremont School of Theology, and an MS in family counseling from the University of La Verne. In addition to ministry, Chris was a psychotherapist for 25 years. He is the author of 6 books, including Do Think Twice, Provocative Reflections on Age-Old Questions, which includes chapters about today's topic. He will sign copies of his books after the service. Chris lives in Fremont and is married to Joanne Schriner, who is with us this morning. Hi, Joanne. And now let us begin our service. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Chris Schreiner. My pronouns are he, his. And as we light the chalice this morning, I invite those of you who are on Zoom, if you have a chalice with you, to go ahead and light it along with us. And for the words for the chalice lighting, I have two different sources. The first one being Confucius. Real knowledge is knowing the extent of one's ignorance. And then Albert Einstein, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. Now, our centering words draw upon many sources of the living tradition, and this morning I'd like to share centering words from Janet Wong, who's a poet. And this is a poem she wrote called Liberty, which is, of course, as you'll see, a takeoff on the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge acceptance of the views so different that make us America. To listen, to look, to think, and to learn. One people sharing the earth, responsible for liberty and justice for all. Now, as we listen to the bells and fade away into the silence, let us use that as an opportunity to continue to arrive here more and more fully.
If you are young or young at heart, I invite you to join me up here on the colorful quilt for a story about Albert Einstein, who was one of our opening word. This is a story about Albert Einstein's life. So it's called On a Beam of Light. It's a story about Albert Einstein. Hello, good morning, my friends. We got a whole zoo here. So, over 100 years ago, as the stars swirled in the sky and the earth circled the sun, as the March winds blew through a little town by a river, a baby boy was born. His parents named him Albert. And there he is. Albert turned 1 and didn't say a word. Albert turned 2 and didn't say a word. Albert turned 3 and hardly said a word at all. He just looked around with his big, curious eyes, looked and wondered, looked and wondered. His parents worried. Albert was so different, standing. Was there something wrong with him? But he was their baby, and so they loved him no matter what. One day, when Albert was sick in bed, his father brought him a compass. It was a small round case with a magnetic needle inside. And no matter which way Albert turned the compass, the needle always pointed north, as if held by an invisible hand. Albert was so amazed his body trembled. Suddenly, he knew there were mysteries in this world, hidden and silent, unknown and unseen. He wanted more than anything to understand these mysteries. So, Albert started asking questions. Questions at home, questions at school, so many questions that some of his teachers told him that he was a disruption to the class. They said he'd never amount to anything unless he learned to behave like the other students. But Albert didn't want to be like the other students. He wanted to discover the hidden mysteries of the world. One day, as Albert was zipping through the countryside on his bicycle, he looked up at the beams of sunlight speeding from the sun to the earth, and he wondered, what would it be like to ride on one of those beams? And in his mind, right there and then, Albert was no longer on his bicycle, no longer on the country road. He was racing through space on a beam of light. It was the biggest, most exciting thought that Albert had ever had, and it filled his mind with questions. And so Albert began to read and study. He read about light, he read about sound, about heat and magnetism, about gravity and the invisible force that pulls towards our planet and it keeps the moon from floating away into outer space. Magnetism, gravity, light, sound. And he read about numbers. He loved numbers. They were like a secret language for figuring things out. But all that reading still didn't answer Albert's questions. So he kept on reading and wondering and learning. When Albert graduated from college, he wanted to teach the subjects he loved, all the things he had read about for all those years. But he couldn't find a job as a teacher, so he got another job. A simple, quiet job in a government office, an office where he worked with other people's ideas and inventions. And he did the work so very well and so very quickly, so quickly that he had lots of extra time to think. Albert, one day, watched a lump of sugar dissolve and disappear into his hot tea. How could this happen? He watched the smoke from his pipe swirl up and disappear into the air. How could one thing disappear into another? And then he figured it out. He thought about the idea that everything is made up of teeny tiny moving bits of stuff, far too tiny to see, little bits called atoms. Some people didn't believe that atoms existed, but Albert's figuring out proved that everything in the world was made of atoms. Even sugar, even tea, even smoke and air, even Albert, even you, even this book. And then Albert thought about motion, and he realized that everything is always moving through space, moving through time. Even when we're asleep, we're moving as our planet circles the sun and our lives travel into the future. Albert saw space and time as no one ever had before. And so he wrote down his ideas, and he put them in envelopes, and he sent them to science magazines. And the magazines, they printed everything. And that Albert sent. And he hoped that the scientists and the professors would be very interested. And they were very, very interested indeed. And they asked Albert to come work for them and teach with them. And for the first time, people started to say, Albert is a genius. And now Albert could spend his days doing what he loved, imagining, wondering, figuring, and thinking. And he thought about very big things, like size and shape of the entire universe, and he also thought about very small things, like what goes on inside of atoms. And he thought about the mysterious forces like magnetism and gravity, and he discovered new ways to understand how these things work. So as we get to the end of this story, Albert thought and he figured out until the very last minute of his life. He asked questions never asked before, and he found answers never found before, and dreamt up ideas never dreamt before. Albert's ideas helped build spaceships and satellites that travel to the moon and beyond. His thinking helped us understand our universe as no one has ever had before. But still, Albert left us many questions. Questions that scientists are still working on today. Questions that you may answer one day by wondering, thinking, and imagining. Thank you for listening to my story today. Before I tell you the song, I just want to say this morning for summer Sunday school, we will be going to Magical Bridge with Greg and Edie. So if you would like to go to Magical Bridge Playground with us, please meet us in the lobby after the song so we can have the parents sign a permission slip. Thank you. And with that, let us rise in body and spirit and sing number 1024, When the Spirit Says Do. The words are in your order of service and on the screen.
I want to ask you, how many of you are familiar with Douglas Adams, the author of Restaurant at the End of the Universe? And so a lot of you. Wonderful. This is a reading from The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Begins, "The universe is an unsettlingly big place, a fact for which the sake of a quiet life, most people tend to ignore. Many would happily move to somewhere rather smaller of their own devising, and this is what most beings in fact do. For instance, in one corner of the eastern galactic arm lies the large forest planet Aglarun, the entire intelligent population of which lives permanently in one fairly small and crowded nut tree, in which tree they are born, live, fall in love, carve tiny speculative articles in the bark on the meaning of life, the futility of death, and the importance of birth control. Fight a few extremely minor wars, and eventually die strapped to the underside of some of the less accessible outer branches. These creatures are certain that their tree contains absolutely everything of any importance. In fact, the only Aglarunians who ever leave their tree are those who are hurled out of it for the heinous crime of wondering whether any of the other trees might be capable of supporting life at all, or indeed whether the other trees are anything other than illusions brought on by eating too many agla nuts. Although it may seem bizarre that Aglarunians think their tiny home contains everything significant, there is no life form in the galaxy which is not in some way guilty of the same thing." Now we're going to sing hymn number 1023 in the Teal hymnal. And this is a very short hymn, so let's sing it through 3 times. 3 times, building bridges. I'm going to start off this morning with a little poem by Kurt Vonnegut. He used the male-focused language of his era in this poem, but we can hear it as referring to everyone. Tiger got to hunt. Bird got to fly. Man got to sit and wonder why. Tiger got to sleep. Bird got to land. Man got to tell himself he understand. Last week I suggested that most people think they know a lot more than they do about a wide range of topics. Today I'm going to expand on this theme, and I'm going to start with a personal story. The story is rather long, but it's such a fine illustration of self-deception. Many years ago, I enrolled in a well-known course in psychic healing. This course had trained thousands of people to go into a deep trance, and in that trance, to diagnose and heal physical illnesses. As the grand finale to the class, we divided up into groups of 4 and took turns diagnosing and healing disease. Each of us prepared by closing our eyes, going into this trance we'd been practicing, and then another student read us a card that listed the name, age, and city of some person none of us knew. The card also included the illness the person was suffering from. However, we didn't read that to the student in the trance. The student would attempt to identify the illness and heal it. We couldn't know whether healing had taken place, but we could verify for ourselves whether or not the person had gotten the diagnosis right. So the first student entered into a trance, and another student read the name, age, and place of residence to her. But my fellow students were not content to let this woman exercise her psychic powers. They gave her hints, even though our instructor had warned us not to do that. After they'd given her enough clues to know that the illness was a lung problem, she said, "I don't see any right lung." So another student then replied, "Well, now imagine yourself reaching into this person's chest and see which lung is missing." Well, if she says there's no right lung, and they tell her to guess again, how many more lungs are there? "Oh, yes, it's the left lung." Very good. When the teacher came around and asked how the exercise was going, they replied, "We're all about 100% accurate." However, I did complain about all these hints, and they knew I was feeling like it wasn't quite going the way that I would ideally like it to see. So during a break, one fellow asked me to go through the process just with him. He promised not to offer any clues at all. So I agreed, but I secretly decided I would not go into the trance this time. I would simply rely on reason, because I thought that actually unconscious reasoning processes were what was allowing people to pick up on these hints. So when he said, "Now, Chris, look into this person's organs and bones," I tried to use my reasoning process and think, wait a minute, he specifically mentioned bones. Why was that, I wonder? I think it's arthritis, I said. "Wow, that's right, Chris." I have become skeptical about ESP and other paranormal phenomena, but I admit that there is some controversial, highly debated evidence for these claims. We need skeptics about such matters, and we also need speculators. So I'm even skeptical of my own skepticism. Like Vonnegut's typical human, I sit and wonder, why? But I try not to tell myself, I understand. I just don't think we know very much. This sermon series is called A Gospel of Ignorance, and gospel means good news. Last week I suggested that admitting the limits of our knowledge can empower us and even inspire us in 2 ways. It can foster a healthy humility, and it can fill us with an awe that is deeply spiritual. Some of my examples last week had to do with economic and political issues, in which we seem to be ignorant. And because these are crisis times, I'm going to say more today about these topics. And then I'll elaborate further on the idea that facing ignorance can be a kind of gospel. As you know, some of the political changes sweeping our country are striking terrible blows against Unitarian Universalist values. And because many of these changes are shocking and unexpected, this is an opportunity to realize that we did not understand our fellow citizens as well as we thought. It's hard to just be with our perplexity, experiencing bafflement until new insights come to us. I know we'll learn crucial lessons from this mess. I just wish the lessons would come more quickly. One thing I'm glad of is that when I first saw Donald Trump in the Republican presidential candidate debates about 10 years ago, I made a commitment that I would never try to figure this guy out. He earnestly, so sincerely, from his heart, proclaimed so many obvious falsehoods and cheerfully contradicted himself so many times, I figured there was no way to know what he really thinks. And hundreds of times since then, I've heard commentators inform us about why Trump said or did something bizarre. Pundits are still pounding on how stupid he is, or how childish, or how easy he is to manipulate, or how unhappy he is deep inside, making him sound rather pitiful while he takes over the world. My decision not to diagnose Donald goes along with my general skepticism about our ability to understand people's motives. Anyone who works as a psychotherapist will find out before long that there are tons of examples of people just completely misunderstanding each other, even though they've known each other for years. Most of us have a lot to do also in learning to understand ourselves. Okay? In fact, just last week I read an academic paper that mentioned the mountain of empirical evidence showing that our explanations as to why we acted are extremely unreliable. If I can't even understand myself, how am I going to understand Donald Trump? And how are the pundits doing at explaining why Kamala Harris lost? I'm going to quote an outstanding political blogger named Doug Mooter. How many of you follow Doug Mooter's blog? I'm glad to see at least a couple or three or four of you are following his blog. He's a Unitarian Universalist, and he's so well researched and thinks things through so clearly. I'm very impressed with him. His blog is called The Weekly Sift, sifting the news a week at a time. The Weekly Sift. So recently, he commented on an article by Nathan Heller in The New Yorker. He writes, Heller begins with an observation I keep banging my head against. All those accounts where Harris lost because she didn't do something, almost invariably she did do the things they're claiming she didn't do. She talked about kitchen table issues. She had detailed policy proposals. She gave interviews. She reached out to every kind of voter. She raised money. She advertised. She had a great ground game. But for some reason, the things she did and said didn't register with some large chunk of the electorate. For some reason. As I've been talking about perplexities about Trump and American voters, have your own theories been popping into your mind? You may have found yourself thinking, but Chris, that is the problem, don't you see? Well, whatever your theory is, I'm not saying it's wrong. However, notice if it pops up automatically as a reaction to somebody else's idea or as a reaction to my skepticism about what we know. Now, if we want to make progress in fiction-proofing our minds, one way to do that is to recognize our own biases, to recognize when we're rigidly attached to some opinion. For example, when you heard about global warming decades ago, did you immediately assume it was a big problem? Or did you immediately assume that environmental extremists were being hysterical? Either assumption reveals a bias, because at first this idea was controversial. Then how did you react as a scientific consensus developed that human activity is heating up the planet? And then what did you think when scandalous emails were discovered that suggested that some scientists were exaggerating the data about global warming? Then later, it looked as if this attempt to cheat on the data was really rather insignificant. And of course, now the case for warming is overwhelming. Did you revisit your opinions, kind of think, well, I wonder about this, in each case as new data emerged? So we can identify our biases and resist the temptation to automatically believe whatever confirms our opinions. Now here's another very human mistake. Our brains are constantly discovering patterns, including patterns that aren't there. Sometimes that can make us actually turn the exception into the rule. I heard of a high school principal who was always talking about how baseball players were good students. And he always mentioned 2 straight-A students who were star pitchers. Well, somebody looked back through the class records and found that the baseball players had the same pattern of grades as everyone else, with 2 exceptions. The 2-star players, the 2-star pitchers, the principal loved to talk about. Okay, so notice here, the 2 students had been unusual. Being unusual, they stood out. Since they stood out, he paid attention to them. Since he was focusing attention on them, he came to believe they were typical. What a paradox. When we see something unusual, it may stand out and seem to be typical. Another pitfall is the unconscious belief that everything is about me, taking things personally when we should not. Aspiring physicians often develop medical school syndrome. As soon as they read about some ghastly, incurable, agonizing, and fatal illness, they're sure they've got it. In astrology, I read about the typical Pisces, and I see myself. But suppose you and I sat down and wrote up a little personality profile using vague and general descriptions that could fit almost anyone. Then we could tell somebody, here are the results of your psychological tests. Or, this is the way you are because you're a Capricorn. Do you think they'd buy it? Actually, we know they probably would. Let me read you a passage from a standard psychological testing handbook or textbook. It is a relatively easy task to prepare a pseudo-report from general stereotypical statements that apply to most people. A considerable body of research has demonstrated that such reports are readily accepted as remarkably accurate self-descriptions by a large majority of people. Another problem is that people often make amazing mistakes either in observation or in interpreting what they see. Of course, people do vary enormously in their powers of observation and their abilities to interpret, as is illustrated in this story of the time Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went on a camping trip. Middle of the night, Holmes wakes up and gives Dr. Watson a nudge. "Watson," he says, "look up. Tell me what you see." "I see millions of stars, Holmes." "And what do you conclude from that, Watson?" "Well, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Horologically, I deduce that the time is approximately 3:15. And Watson, as you look up at all those stars, what else does that suggest? Well, theologically, it tells me that God is all-powerful and we are small and insignificant. What does it tell you, Holmes? Watson, you idiot. Someone has stolen our tent. Here's a real-life example of mistaken observations and interpretations. One day, a Professor Mendoza appeared on Spanish television claiming that he could start watches and bend kitchen utensils, such as spoons, at a distance of many kilometers. Thousands of people called the station, verifying that their timepieces were restarting and their cutlery had begun to bend. Professor Mendoza then revealed that he was actually the president of Spain's Magicians Society and was relying on the power of suggestion rather than psychic power. No doubt lots of people have some bent forks and spoons lying around. After Mendoza predicted that bending would occur, they paid attention to distortions in silverware they hadn't noticed before. And when we move a stopped timepiece, might jiggle it enough so that it starts ticking. But people may have overlooked that fact when they picked up an old watch and discovered it was actually running. So we turn the exception into the rule. We take things personally when they have nothing to do with us, and we make important mistakes in observation or interpretation. Here's another idea about the value of admitting ignorance. Where there is ignorance, there is potential. It may seem as if our personal problems have no solutions, or that the evils of society cannot be corrected. But because our knowledge is so limited, we no doubt overlook all sorts of alternatives. Life is abundant with possibilities. I am an agnostic about human progress. I do not think we know enough to know whether the world is getting better or getting worse. No human mind is powerful enough to add up all the positive and negative trends and determine whether the world as a whole is improving or deteriorating. Admitting ignorance is also good because it reminds us that we need each other's special perspective. Imagine that this room here is a great valley, and we are all standing in a huge circle around this valley. From over there, you can see things that I cannot see from my perspective, and I can see things that you can't. So I like to think of each person as staffing a lookout post, seeing the world from a particular angle. Being open-minded does not mean abandoning your own perspective. You are responsible for staffing your post faithfully, accurately reporting what you see from your own vantage point in life and in the world. But you can also listen to reports from other posts and occasionally visit their platforms to see what they're observing at that time. We need each other. Conservatives need liberals, and liberals need conservatives, at least to keep each other somewhat honest. And as I've said here more than once, I even think those who believe in God need those who do not, and that atheists need theists. The ones we don't need, in my opinion, are authoritarian politicians and theocratic religionists. They need to stop being bullies and act like truly patriotic Americans. And one more thing. Admitting ignorance keeps us growing. We are the creatures that can always learn more. To paraphrase Vonnegut's poem, tiger knows how to hunt, bird knows how to fly. We know there's always one more. Why? I'm so proud that UUs are known for that bumper sticker that says, "To question is the answer." We are learning to we are learning to rest in our restless curiosity. Tiger got to sleep. Bird got to land. We can accept there's always more than we can understand.
We create this space together, not out of wood and glass, nor even out of electricity and binary signals, but out of our presence. Wherever we are today, we have chosen to be together, hoping that together we can do so much more to make our lives into all that we dream of, and make our world into the one we hope to see. If you are moved by gratitude to each other, we may choose to support with whatever financial resources we can this community that we are creating and that is creating us. You can use cash or check or the QR code, or you can text the word info to the number in the order of service. The offering will now be given and received.
I want to say that I really appreciate that sparkling rendition and the selection of thematically appropriate songs this morning, Larry. That was really nice. I also want to say it's been really great to be here 2 Sundays. I appreciate Reverend Amy letting me do 2 services so I could stretch out with the same theme. And thanks also to Jesse for his help preparing the service and leading the service. And so now we're going to sing Blue Boat Home. This is a song that kind of blends the sense of mystery and awe that I talked about last time with an ocean metaphor, and also the wonder and the beauty of nature. So let's rise as we're able and use the teal hymnal, and of course the words are online as well. As we extinguish our chalice, I'd like to share some words from John W. Brigham. Go your ways, knowing not the answer to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than you know.
Test. Now, if you're online, please unmute yourself, turn on your video, and touch hands virtually by touching the side of your screen while we say our benediction together. If you're in the main hall or the patio, reach out to hold hands if you and the person next to you are comfortable with that, or to show that you are connected in spirit, cross your hands over your heart.
And now in unison, go out into the world in peace.